There are truths that don't feel like revelations. They feel like betrayal. What you're about to hear is not another theory about love, not another generalization about women, and definitely not a romantic story. It's something darker, something closer to the bone. Carl Jung spent his life exploring the unconscious, but there was one thing he discovered that most men are not ready to hear, and even fewer are willing to accept. Jung didn't warn us about women. He warned us about something far more subtle and dangerous, the feminine image that lives inside of men. Not the women you meet, date, marry, or dream of, but the psychological feminine, the anima. She isn't real in the way people are real. She's symbolic, a force, a composite of everything you've ever felt, longed for, feared, or lost. She's your mother's voice, your first rejection, the movie characters that made your chest tighten when you were too young to understand why. And one day, without knowing why, you'll meet a woman who activates her. She might not even look like your type, but something about her will feel inevitable, familiar. You'll tell yourself it's fate or chemistry or maybe even love. But in reality, what's happening is projection. You're not in love with her. You're in love with a mirror. Most men never realize this. They chase women with this strange ache in their chest, this sense that they are finally home. But what they're experiencing isn't connection, it's recognition. The anima has been awakened. And from that moment forward, it's no longer about her. It's about what she represents. She becomes the doorway to something you've lost. Your own soul. I knew a man, a successful writer in his 40s, who once told me that every woman he'd ever fallen in love with had the same eyes. They weren't literally the same, of course. Different faces, different lives, different cities. But the same feeling. The same haunted pull. He called it gravity. He said when he looked at them, he didn't just see a woman. He saw something sacred, something eternal. That's the problem. You stop seeing the person. You start seeing the symbol. You place her on a pedestal not because she deserves it, but because your unconscious has decided she matches a silhouette it's been carrying for years. You don't love her as she is. You love her as you need her to be. And this is the beginning of destruction. Because once she inevitably deviates from the fantasy, once she becomes human, you feel betrayed. You start to panic. You grasp tighter. You accuse. You suffer. But she's not the one who lied. You lied to yourself. You projected something infinite onto someone fragile. Jung called this inflation of the anima. When the feminine energy within a man becomes too powerful, too unconscious, it hijacks the ego. He becomes obsessed, poetic, irrational. He believes he's found the one, but in truth, he's found a piece of himself he hasn't integrated. And the woman, she becomes collateral damage in a war he's waging with his own psyche. Worse still, some women, especially those attuned to emotional energy, will sense this. And if they're unconscious or emotionally wounded themselves, they might feed on it. They may not understand it intellectually, but they feel the power it gives them. To be worshipped. To be the center of a man's inner world. And slowly, the relationship becomes a ritual. He sacrifices his boundaries, his logic, his dignity, all for the illusion that this woman can make him whole. And when it ends, and it always ends, he feels like something sacred was stolen. But she never took anything. He just gave it all away. This is the nightmare Jung tried to name. Not that women are evil, but that most men do not love women. They love their own lost soul, projected outward and dressed in someone else's body. And until a man faces that truth, he will never stop chasing the ghost. He'll confuse obsession with love, worship with intimacy, emotional chaos with depth. He'll burn through women not because they're wrong for him, but because they can never be what he unconsciously demands they be, the return of what he abandoned in himself. So the question is this: when you said you loved her, were you really loving her, or just the piece of you she carried without knowing it. Some women don't fall in love. They enter. They enter your world like a fog rolling in over calm water, soft, slow, beautiful, until you can't see the shore anymore, until you forget there was ever a direction. And by the time you realize you're lost, it's already too late to turn back. You tell yourself, she's unlike anyone I've ever met, and you're right. Because she doesn't just want your time or your body or your effort. What she really feeds on is your attention, your worship, your emotional dependence. Carl Jung understood something very few men allow themselves to consider, that not every woman seeks intimacy. Some are drawn, consciously or not, to control, to manipulation, not out of evil, but out of hunger. A hunger to be desired endlessly. A hunger to matter more than she deserves to. A hunger to never be bored again. These women don't destroy you by accident. They do it with velvet hands. They don't demand your soul. You offer it, willingly, because they know how to dance with your unconscious. They know how to activate your deepest longings, your boyish ache for closeness, your craving for warmth. But none of it is real. It's theater. She pulls you into orbit, not to love you, but to feed on what your obsession does to her reflection. Let me explain this another way. There are women who make you feel chosen. Not just liked, not just wanted, chosen. They make eye contact like it's a secret. They speak like the world's been waiting for this exact conversation. They notice you. They laugh at your silence. They lean in close, not because they're shy, but because they know what their proximity does to men like you. And you fall for it. Of course you do. It's intoxicating. But slowly you realize that the warmth she gives you is not love, it's control. You find yourself adjusting to her moods, anticipating her silence, second-guessing your instincts. You begin to shrink. You become careful. You become smaller so she can keep glowing. That's the spiral. She doesn't love you in the way you love her. She loves that you love her. And that difference, that tiny, invisible difference, is what slowly unravels the man. I knew a guy once. Quiet, thoughtful, engineer, not the type to fall easily. Until one day she walked into his life. She was intense, hypnotic, everything he never expected to want. She didn't ask questions, she made statements. She didn't flirt, she made declarations. Within 2 weeks, he'd canceled plans, changed routines, even cut off an old friend who didn't get it. And she rewarded him, inconsistently. One moment she'd cry in his arms, whispering things no one had ever told him. The next, she'd disappear for days. No texts, no explanations. And when she came back, she acted like nothing happened. He didn't confront her. He just held her tighter, like a man terrified the illusion might vanish. That's how it works. The seductress doesn't have to lie. She just has to be inconsistent. You'll fill in the gaps with your own fantasies. You'll tell yourself she's damaged, that you understand her, that you're the one who finally sees her. And by the time you realize she was never really in it, you've already built your identity around keeping her. This isn't just about bad women. It's about a specific psychic exchange Jung called Anima possession. When a woman steps into the role of a man's internal feminine image, and he lets her stay there too long, she begins to control his emotional regulation. He becomes reactive, needy, obsessive, but worse, he becomes blind to reality. Because now her attention equals existence. This is the most dangerous psychological state a man can fall into. Because he starts defining himself through her presence. When she smiles, he feels worthy. When she's distant, he feels like he's dying. His nervous system isn't his anymore. It's hers. Some women learn this instinctively, especially the ones who were raised with conditional affection. They learn to modulate a man's emotions by giving and withdrawing their attention. They become brilliant at it. Not because they're manipulative in the classic sense, but because survival taught them that power comes from being needed. And they become experts at being needed. They don't want to be held. They want to be chased. And the moment you stop chasing, they vanish, or worse, punish you with silence. They become cold, distant, passive-aggressive. Not because you failed, but because you stopped performing. Here's the hardest part to accept. She doesn't care who you are. She only cares who she is through your eyes. You're just a mirror, a source of emotional supply, a validation machine. And the better you are at feeding her image, the longer she keeps you around. But love? No, that was never part of the contract. Jung said, the possession of the soul by the unconscious anima is a fact of such disturbing significance that it cannot be omitted from a serious psychology. This is not a theory. It's a warning. Because for many men, once the seductress archetype takes hold, there's no turning back. He'll seek her out again and again in different faces, in different bodies, thinking this time it will be real. But it never is. Because the woman he's chasing isn't out there. She's a hunger living inside him, wearing a woman's face. And the longer he projects it outward, the more damage he will suffer. And the more dangerous women he will attract. Here's the question you need to ask yourself. Does she love you, or does she love how much you love her? And more importantly, do you even know the difference? There's a certain kind of woman who doesn't scream or seduce. She comforts. She listens. She nurtures. She makes you feel safe. And in that safety, something inside you begins to weaken. Slowly. Almost imperceptibly. You don't notice it at first. The way you start second-guessing yourself. The way your edges dull. The way you begin asking for permission rather than forgiveness. You tell yourself this is maturity. Growth. Real love. Because she's so gentle, so kind, so devoted. But devotion, when rooted in control, is just dependence in disguise. And comfort, when used as a substitute for freedom, is a prison with warm blankets and soft hands. Carl Jung understood this better than most. He called it the devouring mother archetype, a feminine force that, instead of empowering, consumes. She doesn't dominate with anger or manipulation. She does it with love, the kind that smothers, pacifies, neutralizes. And many men don't even realize what's happening. Because everything looks good. She's always there, always willing, always supportive, but only as long as you remain small. The moment you assert yourself, the moment you begin to separate, she withdraws, or becomes sick, or starts crying without reason. And you find yourself apologizing for wanting your own life. You begin to walk more carefully, speak more softly. You don't joke the way you used to. You filter yourself before every decision, not because she told you to, but because you learned, somewhere deep in your nervous system, that you choosing yourself means she will suffer. And you can't handle her pain, because her pain always becomes your guilt. That's not love. That's enmeshment. It's one of the most invisible psychological traps a man can fall into, especially men who are raised by emotionally unstable mothers. When a man's early experience of feminine love is fused with anxiety, sacrifice, or guilt, he begins to associate love with compliance. He equates emotional closeness with losing autonomy. So when he meets a woman who wraps herself around him with affection, softness, and consistency, he feels whole. But what he doesn't realize is that he's back in the womb. And the womb doesn't grow you, it contains you. I knew a man who married a woman like this. For the first year, he felt like he had finally escaped the chaos of modern relationships. She cooked. She cleaned. She asked about his day. She never argued. She agreed with everything. It felt perfect. But 3 years in, he was empty. He wasn't writing anymore. He stopped lifting. His friends stopped calling because he never said yes to plans. His decisions revolved around her moods, not because she demanded it, but because she'd cultivated a world where his freedom made her sad. And her sadness became law. This is how the devouring feminine operates. Not through force, but through emotional gravity. She pulls the man deeper and deeper into the relationship until he forgets who he was before it. And then, she becomes the only context he has. She becomes the rhythm, the environment, the reason. And if he tries to leave, or even question it, she doesn't rage. She breaks. And that's what really traps him. Because it's easier to endure your own misery than to be the cause of hers. But this arrangement is not love. It's regression. It's a return to the pre-individuated self, the self that cannot exist without the other. And Jung would call this the death of masculine development. You see, the feminine has two faces in mythology, the nurturing mother and the devouring mother. One gives life. The other takes it, not through violence, but through absorption. The devouring mother archetype doesn't want you dead. She wants you infantile, passive, dependent, harmless, loyal. She doesn't want a man. She wants a boy who never leaves. And many women don't know they're playing this role. It's unconscious. But the effect is the same. They unconsciously punish independence. They reward compliance. And they redefine intimacy as a form of fusion. If you love me, you'll never need anything but me. Over time, a man stops speaking truth, stops challenging, stops dreaming. Because in this paradigm, desire is betrayal, and selfhood is rejection. The tragedy is that men in these relationships often stay the longest, because it feels like home. But what they don't see is that home has become a cell, and they're the ones who close the door. This is why Jung said, where love rules, there is no will to power, and where power predominates, there love is lacking. True love doesn't require you to shrink. It doesn't ask you to erase yourself. It doesn't die when you disagree. If it does, it was never love. It was containment. So here's the question you need to answer. Do you feel loved or owned? And if you had to choose between peace and freedom, which one would you betray first? There comes a moment in every man's psychological journey where the fantasy must die. Not be romanticized, not reframed, killed. Because until it dies, it owns you. Carl Jung didn't speak of healing in soft, sentimental tones. He spoke of confrontation, of facing the full horror of what the psyche has hidden. And when it comes to the feminine within, the confrontation is brutal. Because you're not just facing your mother, or your lovers, or your exes. You're facing the woman inside you, the one you created, the one you blamed, worshipped, chased, mourned. And if you don't confront her, she'll rule your life. She is the Anima possession, not the nurturer, not the muse, the tyrant, the manipulator, the eternal goddess you can never satisfy. She is not evil, but she is unconscious. And what remains unconscious in a man becomes fate. When Jung worked with men trapped in obsession, confusion, and psychological fragmentation, he didn't simply analyze their traumas. He looked at their fantasies, their projections, their addictions to impossible women. He understood that most men do not desire women as they are. They desire redemption through them. They want to be saved, to be seen so deeply that they never have to do the work themselves. That is the curse of the internal feminine. When you believe she completes you, you become her slave. And she doesn't need a whip. She only needs your refusal to grow. Most men live their lives trapped in this cycle, idealize, pursue, fuse, collapse. They call it love. But it's psychodrama. A loop of unresolved mother hunger, fear of individuation, and spiritual laziness. And women suffer too. Because no woman, no matter how radiant, can live up to a man's unconscious need to feel whole. And when she inevitably fails him, she becomes the witch, the manipulator, the seductress, the cold-hearted narcissist. But the real enemy isn't her. It's the part of him that refuses to separate the divine from the human. It's the boy in him who still believes salvation will come with soft eyes and unconditional approval. And unless he burns that illusion, he will never be a man. Jung believed that the anima must be integrated, not eliminated, not worshipped. Integrated. What does that mean? It means the man must become conscious of her presence inside himself. He must name her, speak to her, face her symbolic power, and then withdraw it from others. No more projecting soul onto strangers. No more imagining meaning where there is none. No more calling obsession destiny. No more confusing attention for love. He must reclaim the qualities she carried: intuition, feeling, soul, vulnerability, creativity. Not to become more feminine, but to become whole. The healthy masculine does not deny the feminine, but it refuses to be ruled by it. He must become, in Jungian terms, the self, the one who holds both opposites, the king who doesn't kneel to his own dreams, the man who can feel without dissolving. There is a myth Jung loved, the story of Odysseus and the sirens. Most men remember the part where Odysseus tied himself to the mast so he wouldn't follow the song and crash on the rocks. But they forget why he did it. He wanted to hear them, but he didn't want to obey them. That is the goal of inner work. Not to become numb, but to become sovereign. You don't kill your longing. You learn how to rule over it. And sometimes that means letting go of the most beautiful idea you've ever held, that one day a woman will come and make everything right. She won't. Not because women are broken, but because they were never meant to carry your soul. It's yours. And when you give it away, to the fantasy, to the myth, to the archetype, you don't just lose your mind. You lose your manhood, your direction, your fire. You walk around haunted, addicted to pain, mistaking suffering for depth, confusing chaos for love. There are men who spend their entire lives chasing the internal goddess through women who never ask to be altars, and they die bitter because the anima never loved them. She was never supposed to. She was supposed to challenge them, to awaken them, so they would grow. But instead, they kneeled. So now the choice is yours. You can keep chasing, keep projecting, keep crying over women who never understood what you were asking them to hold. Or you can walk into the fire, name her, reclaim her, and become what she was trying to lead you toward from the beginning. A whole man. If you've made it this far, you already know this truth has been inside you for a long time. I didn't invent it. Jung didn't invent it. You felt it in every heartbreak, every unanswered text, every woman who didn't love you the way you needed her to. You don't need her love. You need your own integration. So if this hit you, subscribe. Leave a comment. Speak your truth. Because some of you are already free, and others are just now waking up. What if the most important woman in your life was never real, but the part of you you've been avoiding all along? Would you still chase her,